I think one of the big things I want to go through with you is reflect on the journey from the first RLCS where you were the world champion, season 1 world champion, and now to this event. You know, you gave out the medals at this event.
I mean, my journey before Rocket League, funny enough, was playing, it was the Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Power Battle Cars. Like the car soccer thing has been with me for as long as I can remember.
It was all there, and you became the early, I want to say it like god of Rocket League, right? Like at the time, no one could understand how you were doing what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I had a big leg up on people because I spent so much time. I played the alpha a bunch. I was giving tons of feedback. The way it plays hasn't changed. Like the physics and everything has not changed since then.
Seeing that moment and seeing that that trophy lift, what was going through your mind when you gave out those medals and you saw that happen for those new players?
I was a little nervous, and everything that's running through my head is, oh my god, I don't want to mess this up. Oh, what if I trip on stage and knock the trophy over and everything shatters and it's a mess? I was a bit nervous, but then I remembered, as I'm watching the grand finals, the way I calmed down from that was I looked at the players and I went, they're going through far more than I'm going through, definitely.
Kronovi, welcome to Beyond the Game. It's good to have you here. We've just come back from Dusseldorf where we had the World Championship. We got to hang out a lot there the days before the event, and then also on the crowd days we were spending a lot of time together. I guess first things first, how you feeling post-Worlds?
Feeling good. I mean, more motivated than ever to, get in ranked and, just copy what the pros are doing, except that didn't work at all. Just like, oh, I think I'm this pro player. I'll play just like the grand finals. And then I've owned gold or something bad, It just does not translate the way I thought it would.
I think the biggest thing for me is realizing that my teammates aren't Zen and they can't just clean up after everything. You have to be a little bit more patient with your teammates. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I think one of the big things I want to go through with you is reflect on the journey from the first RLCS where you were the world champion, season 1 world champion, and now to this event. You gave out the medals at this event. You were a generation before those players. There were some of those players and Farah, the coach there, who you got to compete against. And then obviously some of the players who barely got to see you compete probably, or maybe they were pre-teens when they're watching you compete. So the whole journey of Rocket League has been a long, long way. So I guess to start things off, tell me what your journey, even before Rocket League, was like as young Cam.
I mean, my journey before Rocket League, funny enough, was playing the game that Sonex developed before Rocket League. I was playing this since I was like 11 or 12. It was the Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Power Battle Cars. Like the car soccer thing has been with me for as long as I can remember. Like before that, it was like I'd play like Spyro or Smash Melee on my GameCube or like Pikmin or something. But the moment I got a PS3 and I found car soccer, that was like, okay, when I get home off the bus, my homework's done, my chores are done, it's that until dinner time, and then that until bed. Like car soccer was just, it hooked me immediately.
I guess with SARP, so Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Power Battle Cars, SARP for short, you guys had a little competitive community, and a lot of those competitors are now beloved members of the community. We've got some of the casters were part of that community, some of the early pros and now coaches were part of that community. So talk a little bit about the competitive, I guess you didn't call it esports back then, but the SARP esports community that was there.
Yeah, there were people that were very naturally competitive. I mean, it's kind of just the nature of the game. There's so much skill expression. So people were hosting, like they were playing ranked, and at the beginning it was just people were excited to play on, be top of the leaderboard basically. But SARP had a cool feature that I think is what really spawned the concept of running tournaments, even though back then we had no prize pools or anything like that. Like the most we played for was a yearly tournament. And it was like a $50 PSN gift card. Like that was it. That was our big world championship every year. It was $50. And somebody would just front the gift card because they were generous. But SARP had a team leaderboard, like kind of the way Rocket League has clubs now. You would sign up as a team and have a team name, and you could only play with the roster of like you had like 4 people on your team, and you would queue up like 2v2, 3v3, or 4v4 with your team, and your team would have MMR against another team, and there was a leaderboard for this. So it was very popular amongst even the small community we had then. And I mean, I would love to see something like that in Rocket League, because if it worked back then with like all 1,000 or 500 of us, it would work now.
Yeah, I mean that would also get those early recognitions of teams who then maybe compete in RLCS, that kind of thing, and you could even use it as like an early qualifier, because I know they have that in Valorant now, where they have the team based tournaments in game, which is like acts as an early open qualification for other tournaments. It could definitely be an interesting concept there. But then with SARP, you came into Rocket League, and it was a different game, but obviously you were at that sweet spot of being a young enough player, but also very skilled at the previous game, picked up the new game very well. The right timing was all there. And you became the early, I want to say it like god of Rocket League, right? Like at the time, no one could understand how you were doing what you were doing. So talk about that early phase of Rocket League when it was like, have you heard of Kronovi? You know, like that was
Mhm.
the start of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I had a big leg up on people because I spent so much time like running the alpha. Like I played the alpha a bunch. I was giving tons of feedback. The game took shape very quickly once the first alpha happened, to like a beta the next year in December, and then the beta where a lot of my stuff went viral. That was the beta the month before the actual release,
Mm,
and that was where the game basically, the way it plays hasn't changed. Like the physics and everything has not changed since then. And that was where I think I started to understand the differences between SARP and Rocket League. And I was just trying stuff that I thought made sense in my brain. Like I watched some of the shots back from like my beta montage, and I'm like, wow, these are so ahead of their time. But it was just
mm,
because the game was allowing me to be creative. And that was all
mm,
I did back in SARP. I was like really into, it was weird. I was like obsessed with like cool shots and almost like freestyling in that game. And freestyling was not very popular, I guess. And it was difficult to do because you just had no ball control. Like the ball would just bounce off your car in SARP. But in
mm,
Rocket League, you could actually keep the ball close and do plays that kind of mimicked more actual like soccer dribbling and cool tricks. So I was
mm,
obsessed with doing that in the beta, and that went viral. And people were just like, "Oh my god, I didn't think to play this way." And a lot of that is just because like when the game launched, I left a review on Steam. I said this game's all right, but it said I had
mm,
300 hours played, because I had accessed all the betas and stuff through Steam. And
mm.
everyone's like, "How does he have so many hours? It's in the first like 10 minutes the game's been out. What is this? He's cheating."
Yeah, well, I mean, early on, you were the first pro I sort of obsessed over. You know, I watched your streams, and it was you and Cooksir, you know, the early two players. I remember I couldn't play Rocket League because I was at my parents' place around Christmas time, and I would just watch every hour of your stream. And then through that, I found you had a little call out for Gibbs for subpar but in HD. I think it was the Law back then as well, was one of those people on that list, some of the early
Mhm.
SARP vets. And I went and checked out Cole's stream, and then I got quite obsessed with subpar but in HD and loved their content. And off the back of that, I got well and truly involved in esports. And around that time, reached out to James Bot, and then through James Bot got involved in casting and involved in the community that you used to hang out in or on TeamSpeak. And
Mhm.
then consequently, you were the first pro I met. So from my point of view, there's this godlike player who, in my mind, was unbeatable. You know, you had this like gift that no one could compare with, and then just rocked up in the general chat on TeamSpeak and started chatting with you. And so my introduction was very much like from nothing to everything early on. For you back then, did you feel that? I don't want to say it in like an egotistical way, but did you feel like you were the best? Did it feel like you had this sort of I can beat anyone mindset?
I definitely did, just because there were so many games where I would queue up, and if I didn't recognize their name, I was like, I'm gonna beat them by 20 goals. Because
Mm,
people just, and I would just kick off goal people like 20 times in a row who are new to the game.
mm,
Because kickoffs were a big deal even back in the day. So I knew all the diagonal spawns. I knew the
mm,
fastest way to get to the ball, the angle you want, because that translated super well. And that was a part of the game that people just did not understand very well. It was like once the kickoff happened and everyone had floundered near the ball, they could start actually playing it the way they thought they should. But I would score like 15, 20 goals on people on kickoff until I played like somebody I recognized, like Marky or Pashy or Cux or, Gambit or something like that. I'd actually run into somebody that I would always play with back in the day for years in tournament.
mm,
And then it would be a real match. And even then, I was still very confident that I could beat them. but I felt like I could back up that feeling. Like I was like rank one on the leaderboards for a long time back in like 2015, 2016.
Mm,
So it felt justified, but there were definitely times where I was still nervous to play. There were lots of insanely close matches that I believe that they made their way to YouTube, and I know lots of people are excited for those. Like I have a really close 1v1 with Gambit. There was a comeback game. I have a 1v1 with Gibbs that's pretty close. That a lot of people when they talk to me, they reference, oh, I remember watching my very first introduction. It was you versus Gibbs, and it's always such
hmm
a throwback to hear that. Same with like a match with like Pashy as well. I think I lost a game to him at 0 seconds. He scored like a 0 second winner, and that
mm,
game people reference a lot too. So people were just really excited to see like the high level gameplay, and
mm.
I definitely felt like a high level player. It was just really rough sometimes. Like the 1 or 2 games I would lose, like I took them really. Like I tried to be calm about it, but on stream I'm like, I haven't lost in like 4 days. Um, I
Yeah,
wonder what people think of me. Do they think I'm bad now?
yeah. I mean, back then it was like if you won and you were at the top, you'd get 0 points to win, right? You could get like
Yeah.
0 or 1. So it was like very top heavy. And you didn't have that same rank inflation that you have now where players get 100 points above the rest of the top 100. But I remember the Scrub Killer 1v1 as well. Like that was a famous one. Like no one believed that he was 12 and all that kind of stuff. It was like, the early days of oh my god someone's beating Kronovi was quite exciting, and off the back of that, you know, you spoke about the early competitive scene. I was speaking with a friend of mine who's from CS:GO, and we were talking about the esports that spawned without intending to be esports and then eventually became them. And you look at like early League of Legends and Counter-Strike, you know, I don't think the developers thought we're going to create a whole esports ecosystem. That just sort of happened over time. And the same thing was true of Rocket League. It was an indie game. It was suddenly blew up in popularity in the early days, and then the esports scene came. Say like it was like 9 months later, right? It wasn't quite a
It was
full
like early
year after release.
2016.
But
Yeah.
I guess for you it was like a year with the alpha and the beta. But it came like in the second year of the game was when it really started to form, and consequently the first RLCS season was exciting because the idea of seeing the best players on LAN, you know, the first time we got to see everyone's faces for a lot of the cases, and also the chance to see EU versus NA on LAN, not over that massive ping difference. Did you feel a lot of pressure going into that first LAN?
Yeah, definitely. We had troubles with our roster that season, and we went with a substitute who was not a SARP veteran. I believe like over half of the players at the first LAN had played SARP before, so that was
Mm-hmm.
like a talk at the time, and that talk fell off by season two. But there was a lot of buzz around this player has 1,000 hours or 1,500 since
Mm-hmm.
release. They've been grinding for like 8, 9 months, maybe a year. And these other players, they have just as many hours, but they've played years
Mm-hmm.
of SARP, so they kind of understand the flow of the game better. And those players had better, I would say, better team play. Passing was a big concept in SARP because you could ping pong the ball really quickly. So you would just hit somebody, hit the ball right at them, and then they would redirect it right in the net.
Mm-hmm.
And that is still a common thing to do in Rocket League now. It's not quite at that pace, but it's something new players didn't quite understand yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult to adapt to our substitute in the first. We had like a month to figure it out, and we did not do well that first month. Me, Latch, and Over had a really rough time, and I definitely felt like we were the underdogs because we were matched up against Flipside, who failed to get the 1 seed that they deserved for EU. They were definitely the far and away the best team in EU, but they got the 2nd seed, and we ended up because we struggled with the 3rd seed. So we matched them, and I think everybody expected us to still win. I think the expectation for me to still be like, oh, he's the best player. I may not have been on the best team, but I was the best player in some people's eyes. But I didn't feel that way. Like I felt like a massive underdog. I felt like this was going to be a super one-sided match, and that we were going to go down to losers, and it was all going to be chalked. It was going to be over. There was a lot of pressure on me. It was difficult to push that aside and try to still be like a team leader and just tackle the problem in front of us of beating Flipside.
And I mentioned it to you when we were in Dusseldorf, but from my point of view, you look like one of the most confident people there. In terms of, in my mind, you were the this crazy guy who knew he was better than everyone. you have quite a good posture, which definitely helped amongst gamers. You know, you stood tall compared to everyone else. You know, you rocked up in shorts. It looked like you're like, yeah, I'm just here to play some Rocket League. You know, I'm super confident, and I think it definitely helped with the, you know, the over zero hype. You know, like he was quite excitable, and you guys looked a lot more natural on LAN. And you know, at the time, we could all see that the gameplay was way worse on LAN than what you guys could produce at home because it was such a new experience. But you said to me that you didn't feel confident at all in that way. So talk me through like your first ever LAN experience in terms of like how you felt with the pressure.
I mean, when I got there, I was definitely just like telling myself, I had to remind myself constantly, like every like 10 minutes, like just, you know, be confident, you know, stick your chest out, initiate conversation with people, talk with your teammates, make sure they're all right, remind them of like, hey, we're gonna we actually did VOD review on my laptop in my hotel room of Flipside every single day that we were there, because we were only there like 2 days early. There weren't like big boot camps back then. But anytime we had an opportunity, we VOD reviewed. We prepped solely and exclusively for our round one. That's all we did. We knew that if they're the Flipside the best team in the tournament, if we send them to losers, we can beat anybody. And if we beat them, it means we're probably feeling pretty good, and that playstyle will just work against anyone else. So we knew that if we beat them, we could definitely run the bracket and then just see what happens. So I tried to set up as best the game plan as I could. I'm very lucky that Latch and Over Zero, they also, I don't know how they felt, but they seemed confident enough, and they were just really excited to be there. So they were motivated to win our first match. But yeah, the night before my flight, I was in shambles. I mean, I almost didn't want to go. I was telling everyone who was close to me, like, this is gonna not go well. I'm really nervous. I think I was so nervous that I was late to the airport. I actually missed the Sonics flight that was booked for me, and I wasn't even worried about it because I was like, a huge part of me didn't even want to show up, because I felt like I was gonna get completely embarrassed, to be honest. Just the crushing weight of that expectation was really weighing on me. But I figured it out at the airport, got a flight, showed up, and said, I think on the plane there, that was where I was like, okay, I'm actually going, so I need to make the most of it. I gotta just quit being a baby about it. Gotta grow up. Like, there's 2 other people counting on me on my team that are looking up to me, and we've practiced for a whole month. For what? Like, for me to quit? You know, like, sure, this month of practice hasn't gone well, but I'm not just gonna give up on everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed so much since then, and I don't know if we really knew what was going to be the future of Rocket League Esports back then. But you went on to lift that trophy, the first ever world champion. It was almost poetic that the original top player of the game ended up winning the first world championship. And then from there, we've seen so much change in not only Rocket League but yourself. You know, you've gone through various rosters, you've changed your role, you played more supportive, you recently retired, and you're now looking at different roles within the community. And I just want to ask you, what's been the evolution of Rocket League Esports been like for someone like yourself who's been involved since the start?
I think the biggest thing is definitely just like the level of production we're at now. It continually amazes me every year. Like, we just constantly have, and a lot of that is the work of the staff, the production at Psyonix. They do a better job every year. They're amazing with feedback. The casters and the analysts are working so hard to put on just a better show. I think looking at things through more of a content lens is taking time. Like, at the first few lands, it's just people trying to make sure they aren't, you know, messing up calls, that they're analyzing the game properly. Because there are definitely times where certain casters are, you know, getting roasted on Twitter because they just have like a bad take about a team and they're just like uninformed. And nowadays it's like you trust everything the caster says without thinking. Unless it's T-Bates, then maybe you might not agree. But the content is just so much better now, and I think that's really helping draw in a lot of viewers, is building these storylines. And I think that's why season 1 was so memorable for a lot of people, is there were a lot of eyes on our team and a lot of eyes on other teams, and they could follow this storyline. And it was that Cinderella storyline, and people just need stuff like that to be able to follow like an esport. And now we have so many stories going on with so many teams, and Sonics does such a fantastic job of telling those stories.
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of storylines, you gave out the medals at the RLCS, which was it's been the honor of so many previous world champions, personalities in the community. Um, Seeing that moment and seeing that trophy lift, did it remind you of the feelings you had back when you won the world championship and the other lands that you won? So what was going through your mind when you gave out those medals and you saw that happen for those new players?
I mean, I was fully trying to put myself in their shoes because I was a little nervous. I got asked a little bit last minute to do it, so I wasn't really like prepared necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that's running through my head is, oh my god, I don't want to mess this up. Oh, what if I trip on stage and knock the trophy over and everything shatters and it's a mess? I was a bit nervous, but then I remembered as I'm watching the grand finals, the way I calmed down from that was I looked at the players and I went, they're going through far more than I'm going through, definitely, because I've been
Mm.
there. I know what that feeling is, playing for the grand final. And I went, okay, if they can play on stage and not fall over, I can probably just hand them their medals and not fall over. Um, and after they won, like being that close to them and the trophy, it's almost like you can feel the emotion coming off of them. You can see it in their face. You know how much this means to them, especially people like Farah and Alpha, who were the ones that after I gave them their medal, they wanted a hug.
Mm.
For them, this has been a long time coming. Like they've been top players, top talent in the scene. And I mean, Farah's interview was tear jerking. You know,
Mm.
it was like he finally got that validation.
Mm.
Um, Whereas, I hand the medal to Zen and he just looks at me like it's just another day, and he just fist bumps me. It's like I feel like the weight of the moment is completely lost on him because it was just too easy. He hasn't lost
Yeah.
yet.
True, true. I mean, with Farah, it's an interesting one because, Farah was there at season 3, when he first came on as a player, and he's seen the whole scene develop. And like back then, we didn't really have coaches like we do now. And to see him go into that coach role and feel the win as much as he probably would have as a player, I think that's really validated that coach position. It's a position that I've been in, and it's a position that you're hoping to potentially go in the future as one of the options for you. I think that's a special moment for the support staff around our esport now, because previously it was these 3 players are your world champion, but I think people have really latched onto. I feel like people are more excited for Ferrer winning that world championship than the 3 players almost now. So it's interesting how that has bounced around in our esport around the coach role.
Yeah, the staff behind the team, almost like I think Farah is definitely like a leader of the team, even though he's not like a player. He's
Mm,
definitely, I think, just their leader. He's the person that all the players look to. He's like the at least from when you look at it from the outside, it's like he's the ideal coach. It's like all the players
mm,
respect him. They look to him. He gives the advice. He's the one that wins the crowds over. He's like the team captain, but he's not on the pitch.
mm,
Is the way that I envision him. And we didn't have that for a long time. It took time, but I think the more a coach like steps into that role and really knocks it out of the park the way Farah did, the more it validates that like position, and the more teams go, okay, well maybe we need a coach like that. Maybe we
mm.
need more support staff, and that's how the scene evolves and moves forward for teams to really get the support that they need. Because I know there are a lot of teams even right now that are lacking in coaching, supporting staff. That if they had it, I think they would perform a lot better.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. And that's something I'm interested to see. I know that after watching BDS do what they did with that whole facility setup, having someone like Mew come in who coached in a very unique, different way that we hadn't seen much before in the sport, I think that was a huge step for a lot of other teams to try and replicate it. And we've seen it quite a lot this season, right? With, the top 4 in Europe all using that training facility model quite a lot, boot camps. Endpoint did it a lot back when they had success with Seiko. And then even Complexity, for example, in North America, I think they're one of the teams that has shone the most despite, before them doing as well as they did. I don't think people would have expected them to do as well as they did this season, right? Or look as good as they did this season.
Yeah,
And a
the
lot,
this year was like an overperformance a little bit in some people's eyes.
yeah, and
So
and a lot of that I think comes down to the way they've been supported, and the way because they moved to North America, all they're focusing on is performing, right? And so they moved to a training facility. They practice and play and compete at a training facility, and it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, it's something I wish I had as a player. I'm jealous of players now. It was a fight to get like a boot camp sometimes. Just like a 1 week boot camp. Can we do this, please? Like playing in person and seeing your teammates face to face. It's so good for team building and for morale and for building chemistry. And I would have loved to have played in a facility alongside my two teammates for like a whole season. That definitely helps me. Like if I had that personally, I'd be way less nervous because I'm prone to being a bit nervous. And that would just calm me down so much, like having the proximity of my team.
Yeah, I think in the press conferences I asked Mew about it, I think, and he said it just accelerates the progress. When I did boot camps in the past, I described it as accelerating change, because sometimes it accelerates change negatively, right? Like a boot camp that highlights a problem will also accelerate a team breaking apart, right?
Yeah, if you got a player who's like raging and throwing stuff and walking out,
or lazy, you'll see the laziness in person. Or if there's like friction between two players, it's a lot easier to hide that friction online, and then suddenly you go in person, it's like, okay, right now we can see the friction in real life. So yeah, I think boot camps and training facilities accelerate change, but if managed well with a training facility and with psychologists, good coach, good team environment, you can definitely develop way faster and much more sustainably. I feel like with online, it's much easier to go through waves, isn't it? You know, we all experienced that during COVID. You know, when you're working online or dealing with life online, you can go through productive waves because you've got so much freedom. But then suddenly you get lazy because you're like, well, I'm at home, just lay in bed all day, don't need to do anything. Right?
It's easy to get distracted too. Yeah, you click on one tab too much, and suddenly you're on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, or something like that, and time disappears.
Yeah, well, speaking of time disappearing, I want to hear which games you've disappeared the most time into and find out about your top 5 games.
Top 5 games.
So we ask everyone who comes on the podcast their top 5 games, and you can use whatever category you like. You can go for games that have been the most important in your life, games you've got the most enjoyment out of, or even just nostalgia can be a big factor for you. But I want to know what Kronovi's top 5 games of all time are.
Well, I'm definitely going to have a few in the list that are just pure like childhood nostalgia, and I'll have some recent ones as well. I think I have to put at number 1 just because it's the only other game that I have thousands upon thousands of hours in. Like Rocket League, I'm sitting at. I can actually look right now. Rocket League is sitting at 12,300 hours lifetime.
Solid. That is solid.
But the other game that has probably at least 6,000 is Path of Exile. That game is my number 1 other game. I don't play it as much these days anymore, but there was a time period where it was like Rocket League, scrims, stream, and then instead of like going out and having a hobby or anything like that, it was like, okay, I'm gonna log off of this game and I'm gonna hop on Path. And that was my free time was just spent in a different game.
Oh, fair. I mean, describe the gameplay? Like it's RPG, right?
Yeah, it's an ARPG, similar to like, Diablo 2, 3, 4. It's a direct competitor with Diablo and the whole series, but it's very complicated. It's got a lot of systems. It's a very in-depth game, and it has like a trading economy. There's no like, you kill a monster in Diablo, you get gold, and you just spend the gold at like vendors. But in this game, there's no actual currency. There's everything that drops is like an item that you can craft on stuff with, or you can barter it to other people. So there's this really cool like Wall Street-esque stock exchange trading kind of vibe to it, because you're trading this item that might be worth 2 of this item, but only half of that other item. And you can find really cool exchange rates to like flip with people, or you'll find a good deal on something, and then you'll craft one thing on it and sell it for double because people they just don't know the intricacies of the game like that. So it's really complex, and I think that's why I have so many hours.
Fair. I mean, you said that would be your number 1, so you putting that above Rocket League?
I think if I had to put Rocket League on the list, of course it would be number one. But I was actually going to avoid putting Rocket League on because I just assumed that, with that with 12,000 hours and a full career, and playing SARP, I feel like it's kind of obvious that that game is like, it's just like a part of me. It's like connected to my soul,
Yeah, it's not. You don't see it as a game in a way. It's like it's a lifestyle.
Right. That's probably why I thought about not putting it on the list because it's so much more than a game to me.
Yeah, I think that's a nice idea. So we're not going to have Rocket League on the list. That's just assumed. It's like a different tier, right? Like it's a whole different section of your tier list. So we've got Path of Exile. What's coming in at number 2 then?
I think number 2, I have to go all the way back for nostalgia. It's definitely the Spyro series. That was because I grew up on PlayStation and Sony stuff. So the platformers that I played were all the Spyro games. I think Spyro 2 was the first game. I beat that game 100% without a memory card. Just had to leave the console running for a few days so my mom didn't turn it off.
God, people don't know what they're missing, like with the memory card style, and also like the games where you couldn't save, right? Like the original Game Boy and NES games and stuff like that, where you just play it through, and then if you turn it off, you start the beginning.
Yeah, like I did the first levels, like the first 2-3 levels of Spyro 2, like probably 100 times. Until I was like, you know what? I want to see the rest of the game. I'll just leave it running. And then inevitably I'd get like halfway through the game and my mom would turn it off while she was cleaning or something. She's like, why is this running? And I'm like, no, a week of progress.
That's amazing. So Spyro 2, I think a lot of the people who we know in the Rocket League community probably have never even played Spyro, right? Because I feel like it's definitely like a mid-20s person kind of game.
Yeah, and they made the remaster not too long ago for people, but yeah, I feel like it's a game that if you were there when if you were around that age when it released and you played it on release, but it's definitely becoming a bit of more of like a hidden gem that it wasn't like super insanely popular the way like like Mario is because they had a ton of stuff coming out around the same time.
Yeah, I guess it's the lot of those kind of games really struggle with the diversity of the modern market. There's so many games out there that Spyro just doesn't cut through like a lot. Like at its time when it first came out, it was such an innovative concept. Whereas if they just repeat that concept now, it doesn't have that same excitement around it because there's so many replicas of that style of game, and a lot of them in many ways are better, right? Like
yeah.
You can't pretend that Spyro is by far the best platformer game or the story is that good in it and all that kind of stuff because the creativity of the gaming industry has evolved beyond the sort of Spyro world, right? And so a lot of it plays off of nostalgia. It's hard to compete
with Nintendo for their level design and mechanics and stuff. Like they've always like they started with Super Mario 64 and then like Mario Odyssey is probably the newest one. Like they're just so innovative. And it's really hard to compete with that.
Yeah, and then when you look at the sort of RPG games of the last 10 years, you've got like much more realistic worlds, and I think a lot of people lean into realism now rather than, and if they're not, they go towards Nintendo, right? So Nintendo's the cartoony world, and then if you want to play on Sony consoles, you go for the realistic games, right?
Yeah, you want the like 60 FPS, 4K, ultra. You just want looks.
Yeah. Well, Spyro, great game. Definitely got a little bit of nostalgia for a lot of people, I'm sure. What's number 3?
I think number 3, I want to go to another nostalgic game, but I'll save it for number 4. Because I think the recent experience and the memories I've made playing this game with people has been good. So it's Destiny 1 and 2, because I kind of want to group them together because they're not really that much different.
Okay, we only allow people to choose one game in a series on Beyond the Game. You got to pick.
Okay, it's tough because same devs. It's like a game as a service thing. It's almost like making me pick between World of Warcraft expansions. Like it's just World of Warcraft,
Okay. So it's not
basically like
it's not like with normally it's Call of Duty or Pokemon, those kind of games. Where it's like you got to choose one where there's loads of them in a series. Whereas Destiny is a little less.
It's very very linear, and there's not much difference between stuff. The game just kind of continues to evolve, and they only made a sequel because they had publisher issues and they wanted to update the game to a new engine and stuff like that.
Okay,
I still think if I had to
I'll let
pick,
you have Destiny. I'll let you just have
no,
Destiny.
if I had to pick, I'd go with Destiny 1 because that's where it all started.
Uh-huh.
Playing with like I'd play with some Rocket League people. Me, Sad Junior, and Latch would run as a fire team of 3 sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Me and Sad used to play games before Rocket League because we would play SARP together and there was nothing to do for a long time, so we'd play like League of Legends. Or when Destiny came out, we loved like finding bugs in that game. We would walk around, we'd find out of bounds, we found this one item dupe thing. It wasn't like a dupe, it was like you could harvest a resource and then change zones, load back in, and the resource would still be there. It wouldn't disappear, and you could just keep doing this. And we found a ton of bugs that became like very community known like a week before people figured it out. We just wouldn't tell anybody. We did like parts of the raids as just like a 2-man using some cool cheat. They're meant for like 6 people. So we had a lot of fun with that game. I made a lot of memories, and a lot of my friends list on like my PS4 was a lot of like Destiny 1 people. Even when Rocket League came out, like I had just as many Destiny 1 friends who were like asking, hey, do you want to do the raid? Do you want to do some PvP? Oh, like Trials is out this week. Like, we need you in here because you're really good. And then I'd have Rocket League people too. So I had like a half and half mix. And it was a lot of fun. That's the kind of game where it's like a looter shooter, but the characters it's got the sci-fi elements. It's got like the abilities and like the supers and stuff. It was just like a bunch of things that I like in gaming, all blended into one really well.
Oh, I love it. I mean, the thing I'm getting from you with all of these is that you're a very hardcore gamer. Like you take it to the next level. Like you don't just casually play through a game. And I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You became a professional gamer, but I'm interested to hear if the other two are similar. Like, are all the games you played? I guess Spyro wasn't as hardcore. That was probably a lot more nostalgia and early game experience. But do you describe yourself more as a hardcore gamer then?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's a main part of like my hobbies. Like I mean, I wanted to get into game development when I was in college, just because I wanted to be so close to the gaming sphere. But I pay attention to all the games that come out. I watch like tons of games expos. I watch a lot of. I keep track of a lot of games, especially now with the way early access works with like indie development. Like I'll watch a game on Steam, see other updates, and decide, oh, they need to work on this, that maybe this isn't going to like hook me in yet. My Steam library has a bunch of games that are like indie early access that I like will play every time there's like a little tiny update. I'm borderline QA for some people, I swear.
Well, you did say you do like to find the little broken bits and the bugs and stuff. Did you find much in Rocket League? Because you said you were part of the alpha and you gave a lot of feedback. What were the kind of bugs in the early parts of Rocket League that you found?
Early on, it wasn't actually too buggy. It was so simple. The worst was when you'd get weird collision and your car could sometimes phase through the wall and you get out of the map. This was a known bug in SARP. You could like sit on the part between the glass and like where the arena is. And if you got your car half and half on that, because they're different, they're probably different textures. If you get bumped by your own teammate at supersonic, you get shoved through the mesh. And if you get pushed out of the correct angle and boost up, you could land on top of the map and drive around. But if you got pushed down, you'd fall into the kill plane and your car would get exploded and respawn. That's what happens to the ball if it ever falls out of the map. If it falls too low, there's a kill plane, and for everything, it just respawns where its spawn point is. So getting out of the map and on top of the stadiums is like something you could do on every SART map in certain spots. And there was a bug for a while in Rocket League where you could just fly supersonic at like a really strange angle, slightly above the crossbar of the nets, and you would just go right out of the map.
I remember that people used to do that for some like montages and stuff, right? People would fly out the map, and it was kind of like a fun little Easter egg in a way, the way people saw it. But obviously, it was considered bugs at the start. I mean, we've had so many different things come into the game over the years that have been bugs. Do you remember the weird thing where you could slide up the wall really fast? If you like wave dash into the wall at a certain point, it would just like slide you right up to the top.
Yeah, it kind of still feels that way now. You just have to make sure you hold power slide. It's like this weird little mechanic that's just not useful at
No.
all. But if you get enough momentum and hold power slide, your car almost like you can tell it wants to like shoot up,
Yeah, yeah. And
but it's not as bad anymore.
yeah, I guess that there is lots of little like weird interactions that aren't technically bugs. It's just it's a physics-based game, right? So things do interact in a weird way. But we've got how many more games? Two more games, right?
Two more. Yep.
To fill out.
I think Borderlands 2 is definitely up there. It's got to be up there. I spent so much time when that game released.
Mm-hmm.
Just another looter shooter. I like characters set in fantasy or sci-fi,
Uh-huh.
and I like loot. I like making a build. I like skill trees. Um, yeah, looter shooters are like the first person gun version of ARPGs to me. So if it's a good looter shooter, I'll probably like it. If it's a good ARPG, I'll probably like it.
You know who our last episode was, right? That we had on here.
Who was it?
We had Brittany Johnson on, who was the actor for Angel in Borderlands.
Oh my god, no way! That is so cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, and she worked at G2 for a while as well, which is an org that you're a part of. So, yeah. So, anyone who wants to check that out, go check out the last episode. But, yeah, I don't know a huge amount about Borderlands, but the feeling I get is it's just one of those really immersive worlds, which once you get into it, it feels incredible. But if you're not committing to it at the start, it just looks like any other like story-based game, right? But there's so much more
and it
depth
can be a
to
bit
those kind of
silly if you
games.
don't buy in. They've
Yeah.
got like a lot of humor and stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, a very good game. We spoke a lot about that in previous episodes. So I think it's definitely one of those games that will keep coppering up in the top 5 games. And then the last game from you, Crow. What we thinking?
The last game is unfortunately I just love this game series so much. And over time they've just continued to polish it better and better. But my number 5 has to be Elden Ring. But I've been playing From Software games since like Dark Souls or the original Dark Souls.
Uh
So
huh.
I love the genre. Elden Ring was like an absolute 10 out of 10 masterpiece. I like loved exploring the world. I somehow my very first blind playthrough got the ending I wanted. And like I spent the whole game looking for the Moonlight Greatsword because it's in a lot of the Dark Souls games and it's one of my favorite weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just happened to stumble into it, and it was like I was already immersed, but then that was like I got little kid excitement when that thing popped in my inventory. I was like, no way, this is where it is.
That's
And
sick.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so immersive in the sense of scale and fantasy and the way they tell the story in that game. It's not like given to you. You have to
Mhm.
you have to find the story out in the world, and I love games like that.
Yeah, I think my closest game genre to that I really enjoyed was Monster Hunter. So I've always been one of those people that I reckon I'd have enjoyed Dark Souls if I got into it at the right time. Now I just find it really hard to pick up games like that because I've got so much of my time taken up by games like Rocket League and other competitive games. And if I pick up a new game, it's normally a Pokemon game, right? So
Mhm.
like I just don't like those kind of games. You have to invest time, you have to learn the mechanics of it. Otherwise, it's not as enjoyable.
Or just
Um,
get good, Gregan. Like,
just get good,
dude.
but getting good takes time, right? Like,
Not if you're just built like that. Like I'm just a natural gamer. I need
yeah, but
5 minutes.
maybe to be fair, because of my Monster Hunter background, I might have a bit of a leg up because it's got similar
yeah.
kind of dodge mechanics and like reading the pattern mechanics of the boss fights. But yeah,
No, you do great.
I've always had a lot of respect for people who are sick at Dark Souls and those kind of games. Wow, pretty good top 5 there. Very hardcore. It definitely represents a hardcore gamer in their mid-20s, right? Like,
Yep. It's kind of outing myself a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those where I'm sure a lot of those games are games that people who are our age will be like, oh yeah, I loved playing that game if they're a hardcore gamer. So, yeah, good list there. So I think one thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something that I think a lot of young players might not have a huge amount of experience with, especially now where there's so much more on the line in Rocket League. I want you to talk a little bit about the experience you had with being dropped from rosters, orgs and things like that, not keeping you on board, whatever the reason is, and then also retirement, right? I think this is something that's really tough in esports is it's such a short career. I mean, you had quite a long career in comparison to many players. Such a short career. There's so much money involved, and when there's no money involved, it's quite scary, right? I want to talk about your experience of retirement first, and then we can go back and talk about some of the team's experiences there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for retirement is like I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, but I had felt that my skill level as a player had was no longer granting me the agency to make decisions that I wanted to make when it came to rosters, when it came to talking with sponsors and orgs. Like I felt like I had lost like the power dynamic of, oh, like people want to team with me, or if I ask somebody, hey, I want to team with you, they took me seriously. You know, I lost that, and to me that was all I knew. And I constantly felt like everywhere I looked, like at a certain point I was just going to end up settling and like accepting this like struggle of like being a bubble player, you know, and just constantly wanting to be there but not being there. um and I'd already been playing so long, and I was already questioning if I was burned out from like just the mindless scrimming over and over
Mm.
for hours a day. I was like, I don't know if this is worth it. Maybe I should retire and see if I can enjoy the game in a content aspect or a coaching aspect instead. So that was really the
Mm.
big motivator for that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about scrims there and for hours a day. How has scrimming and practice changed from when you first started playing to now?
I don't think really it's changed much for a lot of people. Um, Maybe like the way scrims are handled and like the lens they're looked through, or like the way people schedule nowadays, because it used to just be very informal the way scheduling would work, and people would only like schedule against their friends or other top teams. But it's still, you know, make sure you get on early, play a bit of ranked, warm up. You have like 2 3 hours of scrims, and you may or may not do a VOD review after. Some teams would do VOD review like every day. Some would do it like once a week. Some would just never do it. It really depended on like what their coach wanted to do or what the players wanted to do, or if it was just on the players to do it on their own afterwards. I know some teams were like that, where they had like kind of like a captain who would look at replays, and if they saw something, they would ask their player, "Hey, can you hop in Discord? Like this came up, and I want your opinion on it."
Mm.
Um, but I really think a lot of scrims for people, they're just putting hours in. Like it's just they staying fresh, keeping up their mechanics, or trying to continue their good habits. And a lot of scrims is ironing out your bad habits. Like the
Mm.
way the lens I looked at scrims was, what am I doing wrong? Almost every
Mm.
time it was like, what am I doing right? It's like I already know like what my job is on the team, and if it's working, I don't really need. I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to overthink it. But if there are things
Mm.
that I know I'm doing wrong, I'm constantly like, okay, I need to improve in this area. I'm using too much boost. I'm rotating poorly. I'm not trusting these touches, or maybe I'm hesitating. Like it's always fix the mistakes, and you just have to put in so many hours to iron out bad habits.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard, especially in certain regions, that the way things are scheduled is probably the biggest factor. You know, it used to be like day before or on the day, hey, do you fancy a scrim? And then like it was Jazo who was one of the early people to really change that, right? In NA anyway. So yeah, and then let's talk a little bit about departing from rosters, especially when it's a dominant roster like you guys. Well, I say dominant, but like a top roster like you were at G2. What was that experience like of being dropped from a team? Like there's no easy way to do it, right?
Right.
There's no like kind way to drop someone and essentially deny them the opportunity to compete at the top. So what was that experience like for you?
Um, Looking back, like it was so long ago, but definitely in the moment, I was like, I think I took it a little too personally. I was devastated, like emotionally, because I was very connected to that team and that org. They had been with us since season two. They were like our first real org. Like IBA Power they were more of a sponsor than an org, really. But G2 were the ones that came into the scene early. I had been watching them because I watched a lot of other esports as well. Like I watched a lot of League and a lot of CS,
Mm.
and G2 had teams in both. And so I was super familiar with them, and I was very excited to be part of that org and to kind of just like feel like it got ripped away. Like I was like, I felt kind of like surgically removed without getting a chance to like say my piece or like defend myself. but a lot of it was just because there were a lot of things that weren't working. You know, we season 5, 0-2 finish, season 6, 0-2 finish. We were okay domestically, but we just could not play on stage together properly without like crumbling.
Mm.
And everybody decided that it was me. And I knew that things weren't perfect, but I just assumed maybe a little more transparency would happen with like, hey, we're not happy with the way things are going, or hey, we're not happy with like, you know, your attitude towards a loss or something. You know, whatever. I just I didn't know what the problems were until they called me in and they're like, hey, so you're just not going to be on the team, and we've spent like a month figuring out how you're not going to be on the team, and we've already asked other teams if, you know, they made sure that I was taken care of. Like I had like multiple tryouts lined up that I didn't even know about, but that other teams knew about. But it was like this giant, well kept secret, so that I couldn't fight back. Is the way it felt.
Mm.
And that really devastated me. It's why I didn't handle it very well. I think it's why I took it very personally. But time heals all wounds, and I'd like to say that things are okay now between everybody. So it's all good. But yeah, that was definitely the hardest one. Like, and that taught me a lot about the way team dynamics work, the way it's even in an environment where everybody trusts each other. And I would always hope that people were transparent with me. And that was the biggest thing I said. Is that you can tell me bad news as long as you're transparent about it and honest with me about it. I'm never going to be mad at you. I might be mad at the situation, but I'm never mad at you. I can handle things in a business way. I would always tell people that, and then they still did it. And then, of course, I didn't handle it in a business way, unfortunately. It was rough, but after going through that, now it's like there's probably nothing else that could possibly like make me feel like that again. Like it was pretty bad. So that prepared me for every other future thing with any org or any teammates.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I left Vitality, I knew it was coming. I was part of the process of getting Alpha on board, and I knew that once it was a full French roster, I was like, okay, that's fine. You know, like you no longer can have an English speaking coach, and also it'd been 2 years and so on and so on. And then with Guild, like the timing, it was kind of mutual. You know, it's like this isn't working anymore. Try out a new coach, that kind of thing. With Dark Zero, I knew that they were probably going to leave the scene because it was too expensive. They weren't getting what they wanted out of it. It was like, it was fine. Even though it was annoying, it was fine. The one that blindsided me was as a talent, which is interestingly, was when I got dropped from the desk. And so I know that feeling of like, it feels so weird. And then also it defines you for a while afterwards, right? Like if you stream or if someone replies to you, or if you talk to anyone, people just bring it up because people don't know what to say, right? They're like, oh, it's a shame that you got dropped, or it's a shame that happened. I wish you were still on that team, or you know, like if you do well, it's like you did well as a revenge story to them. It's like your life then becomes about that storyline of how you got dropped and how you're now fighting back.
Yeah, and you'd rather just move on and like not think about it anymore, you know?
Yeah, and obviously you're then still in the scene, right? You're playing for another team, so whenever RLCS is on, you're seeing your old team. It's like you're trying to get over an ex, but you having to spend all the time around your ex, right? Like you can't, you can't deal with it, and so that becomes quite tricky. So I completely get it now, and that's probably been the most eye-opening experience for me, was experiencing that and knowing how hard it is, especially for players who then don't find a team to move on, right? Because that was the situation for me. Is like I look at people like Astral and Extra and all these guys who are on top teams, and then suddenly they lose their spot, and it's like, right, now what's next, right? And so they have to wait it out for the next season or whatever, and it's brutal. The esports world is brutal for these players. So I guess
like sometimes they're not taken care of, you know, and they're doing a good job, I think, you know, maintaining like scrims in practice. But and that's, you know, that's why I was very, looking back, grateful to the way like the guys handled it with kicking me. It was like they made sure I was taken care of. I had a team. I got to play them in the semifinals that very next season. So like I was okay. But yeah, definitely some of those, just like the writing on the wall is there. And now in current esports, unless you're really in the know, like fans and stuff, they don't see the writing on the wall. Or players nowadays, it's like, oh, we only got second place at this major. I'm gonna leave, and it just feels so much more impatient now. They don't want to stick around and make things work, which was a big tenet we had back in the day. Like I remember Squishy talking about it in the Cloud9 days, you know, just like that the important factors of like sticking together, working it out no matter what. until it really, really isn't working. And that's why like he's only been on like 3 rosters in his life, you know? Like he was
Yeah.
our sub on G2, and then he was with C9, and then he was with NRG, and like that's it. He hasn't been on many teams because he believes in working things out. And I feel like more and more players these days just don't.
Yeah, I think that's you could see that at this most recent Worlds, how many rosters have done well by sticking together, right? Like you could see the K Corp, the even like Gen G, like throughout the season, like they didn't end on the best note with that performance, but the fact that that was an underperformance and they still made top 8, you know, like that's what sticking together does. You know, Liquid sticking together as that team for so long, making top 4. It's definitely becoming more of a thing. I mean, Falcons even, right? Like, look at those guys. They've gone
Yeah.
through the adversity of a new team coming in and stealing their spots for majors, and they still made that top 8. So, yeah, I definitely see that as a future. I think that like going back to the training facility model, I definitely see that in combination with sticking together long term being that like dream combo. So we'll see
That's
how
where I
that.
want it to go. That's where I
Yeah.
always wanted it to go as a player, and I hope the players in the current era and the future era get that for them.
So I guess last thing on that note is what advice would you give to the current players out there from all your experience on how to, you know, we're about to go to a big off season, how to deal with that potential turmoil for them?
I mean, the biggest thing I think for players is to remain like as friendly as you can with everybody. There's no sense in burning bridges just because you don't like enjoy playing with a player or like getting upset over Rocket League. Like it's difficult and it's our job, and we have thousands of hours in this game, but it's still a game, and you never know when a player is going to be able to fix things. Everyone's like super young. Some players mature over the course of like a year, and suddenly they're like a different person and they're playing better. But
Mm.
you've burned that bridge with them because you didn't handle replacing them or being transparent with them or whatever. And some players as well, no matter what you do, no matter how much you may like let them down easy on a team, they're still going to be upset. They're going to be really upset. They may not be very professional, and you have to just forgive them and give them the chance to like eventually come back and go, hey, my bad.
Mm.
And that means that you just have more connections to everybody, and the more connections you have, the more content you can do, the more storylines you can create. Unless you really want that like these two people hate each other boxing match rivalry, if you're going for that, sure, burn all the bridges you want, but good communication, positive oriented communication, and just letting people know that what you're doing is just because you want to be like on the best team in the world. And it's just your opinion that the two players you want to play with are who you think are the best. And that's all as far as it goes. It's nothing personal.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is remembering that nothing's personal and that, you know, we're all trying to do our best, and sometimes that's together, sometimes that's against each other. But I'm interested to see what happens in this off season anyway, and especially with a big shuffle to try and beat Vitality. But Crow, I think we'll call it there. I'm excited to see what the future holds for you. You know, what big projects you got next. Especially, you know, seeing you coaching would be an amazing thing. You're such a wise Rocket League player, and we've seen how big that's been in the scene now with players like Farah coming through.
Yeah, I want to be the NA Farah so bad. I'm so inspired.
Yeah, I think Farah is probably the biggest inspiration from that event. Like you said, Zen is like happy-go-lucky. He doesn't really understand why he's so good necessarily, but Farah has like grinded his way back to the top through the coaching position. So what an inspiration. We all want to be like Farah. That's that's the key message here. That we might see a load of players retiring early to try and be like Farah. But it's been amazing chatting to you. And obviously, like I mentioned before, you were such a big factor for me at the start. And so to see you still involved, and also seeing you at Dusseldorf, having so many pictures with people being such a big influence on so many Rocket League fans, players' lives in those early days. And hopefully you can find a way to continue that post playing now with your content or coaching or whatever it is for you. So thank you very much for sharing your story and everything that's gone on and the advice. And we end the podcast with the same question, and that's, what does gaming mean to you?
To me, gaming used to mean an escape from just not enjoying things in my personal life. But because of gaming, I got to meet so many people that are amazing, that I connected with, that I grew to like more than like the people that I would meet in real life. And so to me, gaming is a community. It's people that I love to connect with and share experiences with and have fun with.
Oh, amazing. Thank you very much.